Yeah, I definitely learned that not being able to complete Dublin last year because that was such a blow because I trained so hard for it. And I was like, Rachel, you're a fucking Egypt. Like, you knew. I remember describing my fatigue to someone as like I go to work and I'd be like, it's tiring to type. Like, that's not normal. Like, there's a normal level of tired when you're training for a marathon. Of course, you're pushing yourself. And then there's like, it hurts to move my lips and move my fingers. So I learned from that. I definitely have. I think people who are innately driven and motivated struggle with that always. Like I remember again my uncle saying to me, I know I mentioned that he's a sports doctor. He was like athletes like elite or otherwise, especially if they're driven. He's like, you're gonna make this mistake again. And he's like, you are gonna make this mistake again, but try and like bottle this feeling of like what you're experiencing now and what you're not able to do now and help that inform how you move forward. So it's hard to know if I've learned the lesson because I didn't get to do the marathon and then I started training kind of again in January, but now I'm 8.5 months pregnant. So I can't exactly train as I used to train. So I would love to say, yeah, like I'm enlightened now, but like who knows, next year I could be like, you could see on my Instagram, yeah, injured myself again 2 weeks before the marathon, pushing too hard.
So pushing too hard and training and also pregnant. We've had a lot of ladies on talking about training through the pregnancy, and it's something that's probably not talked about enough.
Yeah.
How do you balance training with pregnancy and how do you feel? Obviously, every lady is different. In the first, fatigue is huge because your body is changing, the hormones are changing. How did you balance that as well as I suppose growing another human and training? How does that work? And we will never know what it feels like, but how do you balance that?
Again, it's a lesson in listening to your body, isn't it? It's like knowing the line. And I'd say I've crossed the line a few times. And then I've also listened other times. At the start, I was actually really sick at the start. So I didn't train for maybe like 2 weeks, which is like a quite a long time for me. And then, or at the very start, when I first found out, like you don't feel pregnant for most people, like you just feel the same way you did the week before. And I trained as normal, like I ran like 20 kilometers at the weekend, and that was all fine. Then I got sick. And then when I was coming back after it, I think I kind of started doing like I definitely lessened my mileage. And then as time goes on, you get more and more tired. Like you're gaining so much weight in such a small amount of time. So it's actually you're carrying around extra timber. So everything is like much harder. And I had different periods throughout my pregnancy where I was like, no, fuck this. I'm not doing any more training. I'm just going to go to the gym and do like other types of trainings. But then I'd have a really good run and I'd run like 8 or 10K and I'd be like, oh, that was actually so enjoyable. And I feel great after it. And I also know that all the research says that it's a good thing to do and it's good for your birth and it's good, like, there's a kind of like old folklore that it's like, women were told like do as little as possible and that's all like redundant now. But again, I remember my doctor saying, she was like, you'll know when you're crossing that line of like, this is not enjoyable and I'm actually like really struggling and like insanely fatigued. And that happened to me when that happened to me like 3 or 4 times in a row, which was last weekend. I was like, do you know what? I was like, there's just something in me. And again, has to be like a really like tune into your own body because everyone's different. I have friends who stopped running at the start of pregnancy. I have friends who ran literally until a week before they gave birth. So I'm just keeping up the gym now, but the running, I was like, there's just something that's not sitting well with me here and I'm not enjoying it and it's like not feeling right. So you just kind of have to pull that plaster off and just go, I've done my
Yeah.
best. I didn't think I'd make it to 33, 34 weeks. So
And it is like everyone is different and it will affect everyone differently. And I suppose the benefit is like me and Sean have experienced pregnant women passing us out in a marathon, which is probably our
Nice
claim to
work.
fame. That's
dark
how
moment.
bad our first marathon experience went. But it does depend on people's own thresholds, their own abilities, their foundation, I suppose, where they've come from. Like we're not saying you're pregnant, let's start training for a marathon. It's maintaining and being active and staying to what you know, and the lessons you've learned since before COVID in the younger, that you know the levels at which you can push